Now, there are many shocking health statistics in the news right now. Every day we're getting the dreaded COVID-19 death count, which thankfully is coming down. But another shocking figure released recently is that suicide attempts by elderly people have increased as much as sixfold during lockdown. With loneliness, depression, anxiety, bereavement and seeing no end to the isolation as the causes. So could we be heading into a mental health epidemic for our elderly, Janet? And I know you feel very, very passionately about this and about trying to get our elderly people out of the house again.
I think that's what's happened is the government seemed to blanket all people over 70 together at the start of lockdown. Then they divided elderly people into two groups, but by then it was too late. Everybody over 70 thought we had to stay at home and not do anything because we were in such danger. But then the government said there are clinically extremely vulnerable people who have to be shielded, and they're people who've got serious underlying health conditions, and they're people of all ages with serious underlying health conditions. And then there's another group of over 70s who are just called clinically vulnerable. And those people are allowed to go out, are allowed to go for daily exercise, but they're not to have contact with people outside their household unless it's absolutely essential. I think there's a huge amount of confusion. And what I think the government should do is appoint someone who speaks for the elderly, who talks to this group over 70 and explains what they can and they can't do. Because obviously I feel extremely cross to be bracketed in a vulnerable group with people who, you know, have got other health conditions when I haven't. And the fact of the matter is that 95% of the people who are dying from COVID-19 have serious underlying health conditions already. I mean, doctors say that. Now, if you haven't got any of those conditions and you're over 70, for God's sake, go out, exercise, walk the dog. But unfortunately, people got so scared in the beginning, it's rubbed off on them and they're frightened to do anything.
Yeah. It's very difficult to unpick.
That's right.
What's happened, really, is it? I mean, I feel it, never mind, you know, a vulnerable elderly person. I'm really conscious of still going outside.
It must be really hard as well because a lot of them are not on iPhones or whatever, so they don't get to see anybody. At least we're all got our phones and we can see our family and see our grandchildren and everything, but they can't. They're stuck in the house, lonely, and it must be so depressing. I mean, it's depressing not being able to go out anyway, especially when the sun's shining, but to be stuck in the house and not to be able to be in contact with anybody must be absolutely terrible.
I mean, my mum, I spoke to her a few days ago on Eid, actually, and so she's actually self-isolating with my sister. My mum is a widow and she's got arthritis. Now, before lockdown, she actually was really in control of her arthritis. She'd go for a walk and she'd go and see her community group every Monday. She had a routine, and actually that kept her out of hospital. But the other day I phoned her up and she was in tears, and I've never seen my mum like that. And she said, I can't see my friends, I can't walk because my sister hasn't got a big garden, so she's only doing a little few steps. So actually, in isolation, she's more vulnerable to going into hospital. And she just said, I know how to stay safe. I just want to be able to go out and, you know, socially distance with some of my friends. And it's getting to the tipping point now, I think. And to celebrate Eid, which is all about, it revolves around my mum. She's the head of our family. She couldn't see any of her children, any of her friends, couldn't cook. Really hard.
You just think of the numbers of all the other issues. That will happen off the back of this. It'll not be corona that gets you. It's all of these other things.
It's the mental
it's
health,
the mental health side of it. Lack of
Well, my mother-in-law's 82 and she self-isolated for probably about the first 6 weeks and then she couldn't do it anymore. So now she takes all the precautions, puts her mask on and she just walks up to the market, gets a little bit of her shopping and comes back again. What I will say is that she's taken to drinking wine earlier in the day than she used to do.
But I bet a lot of people are, aren't they?
Is there an underlying health condition at all there?
No, there isn't.
It's just general fear.
Her husband earlier this year, so but luckily she's got her grandson living with her. But it must be so hard. It really, really must be.
It's so
and
difficult.
especially people with no gardens.
I do think.
Yes, Janet.
I do think that we've got to get the message across that older people can go out.
Yeah.
They really can go out. They need to get sunshine and vitamin D because it's so good for you. And all the old people or anyone over 70 is now a P person, a problem person.
Yeah.
They're vulnerable.
Yeah.
They're all, yes, they are vulnerable, but they're not vulnerable if they wear a mask and go for walks. They're not. And somehow, when I hear the story about Saira's mum, I find it heartbreaking. It's because Boris Johnson's message initially was too successful. And now we've got to coax people out and we've got to tell them they're not going to catch anything if they take precautions.
People are so frightened now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the charity director at Age UK have said if the government asks older people with particular health problems to continue to shield at the same time as normal life starts to resume for everyone else, it might have the right decision from a medical point of view, but these older people will need a lot of love and support from the rest of us. It's natural that older people will feel depressed and anxious in this situation they find themselves in, but it is important we counter any feelings they have of being overlooked and forgotten, and that we all have a part to play in this. And it's true, isn't it?
It's so true.
I mean, we have to step up to the mark at this point and look after those that are most vulnerable. And as you say, Janet, if my mum started to go out now, she wears her mask and does all of that, but be safe. But as you say, get a bit of vitamin D if possible.
And finally, I just want to say the NHS has to embrace itself, not just for COVID, but post-COVID, of all the cases that are going to come through as a result.
Very, very, very true.